In the vast, unforgiving sky over the English Channel, Captain Elias Harper gripped the control yoke of his P-51 Mustang, the Merlin engine roaring like a caged beast at 30,000 feet. It was June 1944, just after D-Day, and the 8th Air Force was pushing deeper into Nazi-occupied Europe, their long-range escorts vital to protecting the heavy bombers from Luftwaffe fighters. Elias, a lanky farm boy from Iowa with a jaw set like granite, scanned the horizon through the cockpit canopy, his eyes watering from the thin air and the sting of high-octane fumes. Below, the patchwork of France unfolded like a crumpled map, scarred by bomb craters and the endless churn of war. His squadron, the 357th Fighter Group, had taken off from their base at RAF Leiston that morning, fuel tanks topped off for what promised to be a grueling 500-mile round trip to hammer German rail yards near Berlin. But Elias felt the familiar gnaw of doubt. They'd lost too many birds on these runs, pilots ditching in the drink when engines sputtered dry. Today, something felt different. Whispers in the briefing tent about a radical idea from a test pilot back stateside, cutting power to glide on momentum, stretching range like a hawk riding thermals. Elias shook it off, focusing on the formation. 10 Mustangs in tight echelon, wingtips nearly touching, their silver fuselages glinting under the pale sun. Suddenly, a burst of flak from an unseen battery below rocked his plane, shrapnel pinging off the armor plate behind his seat. Heart pounding, he banked left, the G-forces pressing him into the seat, and keyed his radio. Red leader to formation, eyes sharp, we've got company inbound from the east. The air crackled with tension as dots on the horizon resolved into Messerschmitt Bf-109s, sleek predators diving to intercept. Elias throttled up, the supercharger whining, but in the back of his mind, that glide tactic lingered like a forbidden prayer. As the first enemy fighter closed, guns blazing, he wondered if desperation would force them to try it, or if they'd all be fuel-starved ghosts by dusk. Elias's wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Riley, flew a heartbeat away on his right, the two men bonded by months of shared sorties and the grim arithmetic of survival. Marcus, with his quick Irish grin and a penchant for quoting Hemingway between dogfights, had joined the group fresh from flight school in Texas, his bomber green flight suit still creased from the crate it arrived in. They'd met over ale at the officers' club, swapping stories of home, Elias's endless cornfields versus Marcus's rowdy Brooklyn streets, and forged a pact: watch each other's six, no matter the odds. Now, as the Luftwaffe swarm grew to 20, the squadron tightened, throttles firewalled, climbing to meet the threat head-on. The why of it all burned in Elias's gut. America had entered this war late, but with a vengeance, their pilots like him thrust into the meat grinder of the European theater to bleed the Nazis dry. The Mustangs were miracles of engineering, their drop tanks sloshing with precious Avgas, but range was the eternal enemy, too far to Berlin, too short to loiter and cover the B-17s on their bomb runs. Intelligence briefings painted the picture: German factories churning out V-2 rockets, U-boats slipping past convoys, and fighters like these 109s picking off stragglers. Elias's group was the tip of the spear, tasked with sweeping the skies clear so the fortresses could pound the Reich without mercy. But fuel gauges ticked inexorably downward, and Elias knew the math. At full power, they'd be bingo, minimum fuel for return, before the mission's end. Marcus's voice crackled over the intercom, laced with that trademark bravado. "Hey, Cap, you thinking what I'm thinking? That glide trick from the manual, shut her down and coast like we're on rails?" Elias hesitated, the idea born from wind tunnel tests at Wright Field, where engineers proved a Mustang could glide 20 miles on inertia alone at altitude, doubling effective range by conserving fuel for the fight. It was untested in combat, a gambler's bet against physics and fear. As tracers zipped past, Elias barked back, "Hold formation, Riley. We try it only if we have to." Below, the channel's gray waves mocked them, a watery grave for the unwary. The ambush unfolded with brutal precision, the 109s peeling off in pairs to slash through the American formation like wolves through a herd. Elias yanked his stick, evading a head-on pass that shredded a drop tank from the plane behind him. Young Ensign Theo Grant's Mustang, trailing vapor as it limped away. The air filled with the staccato thunder of 50-caliber machine guns, cordite smoke blurring the view, and Elias's world narrowed to the enemy in his sights. He squeezed the trigger, watching his rounds chew into a 109's wing root. It spun earthward in flames, the pilot's canopy ejecting like a cork. But victory was fleeting. Another Jerry bored in from above, cannon shells stitching the sky. Elias rolled inverted, the blood rushing to his head, and dove to brake, his altimeter spinning wildly toward 25 feet. Marcus stuck with him, their planes dancing in a deadly ballet, but the strain showed. Engines howling at redline, temperatures climbing into the yellow. In the chaos, Elias glimpsed the broader horror. 2 more Mustangs down, one exploding in a fireball that lit the clouds orange, the other's pilot bailing out into the void, parachute blooming like a dandelion seed. Fear clawed at Elias's chest, not just for himself, but for the men he'd led into this storm. Why push so far? The brass demanded results, deeper penetrations to cripple the Luftwaffe before the push into France solidified. But up here, it was raw survival, the thin air sapping strength, oxygen masks fogging with labored breaths. Marcus's voice cut through again, urgent now. Fuel's at 40%, Cap. We're burning it like it's going out of style. If we don't cut power soon, we're swimming home. Elias's mind raced. The glide tactic wasn't suicide, it was calculus. At 30 feet, with minimal drag, a Mustang could descend in a shallow glide, covering twice the distance on the same fuel by letting gravity do the work. Test flights showed it, but combat was no lab. As a 109 flashed past, clipping his stabilizer, Elias made the call. All birds. This is Red Leader. Engines to idle on my mark. Glide formation. Now. The squadron complied, the roar fading to a whisper, and suddenly, they were soaring silently. Predators turned ghosts. The descent began as a controlled fall, the Mustangs slipping through the sky like arrows loosed from a bow, their props windmilling lazily. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. The silence unnatural after the cacophony of battle, only the rush of air over wings and the distant pop of flak to break it. The 109s, confused by the sudden quiet, overshot, their pilot scanning for the vanished roar, giving the Americans precious seconds to reposition. Marcus whooped over the radio, his voice tinny but alive. It's working, Cap. We're ghosts. Look at that ground speed hold. Elias checked his instruments. Airspeed steady at 200 knots, altitude bleeding off at 500 feet per minute, fuel burn slashed to near zero. It was magic, this defiance of the engine's tyranny, born from the desperate ingenuity of men who'd cracked the code of the skies. Back in the States, engineers at the Army Air Force's Materiel Command had pored over data from high-altitude flights, realizing that full-throttle cruising wasted fuel on heat and drag. Idle at altitude let the plane's laminar flow, and the Merlin's efficiency turned potential energy into distance. Elias's squadron was the first to bet their lives on it in earnest, a leap that could rewrite escort doctrine. But doubt lingered. The Luftwaffe adapted fast, and without power for quick maneuvers. One wrong turn meant a stall into the abyss. As they leveled at 20 feet, engines coughing back to life for a burst of speed, Elias spotted the bombers ahead, a stream of B-17s, their contrails like chalk lines across the heavens, droning toward the target. The 109s regrouped, diving anew, but the Mustangs were fresher now, tanks reading 30% instead of the expected 15. Elias led the countercharge, guns blazing, downing another foe in a plume of black smoke. The tactic wasn't flawless, coordination frayed without constant thrust, and the psychological toll of silence in combat weighed heavy. But it bought them time, range, life. Yet as the skirmish raged on, Elias couldn't shake the undercurrent of cost. Theo Grant's plane, damaged earlier, trailed far behind, its engine trailing smoke. Radio silence from him suggested the worst. Marcus stayed glued to Elias's wing, their friendship a lifeline in the fray. But Elias saw the war's toll in his wingman's eyes during debriefs, the haunted stare of a man who'd seen brothers plummet. The glide had doubled their effective range, turning a suicide mission into a fighting chance. But it demanded trust in the machine, in each other, over instinct. As the squadron pressed on, weaving through enemy fire to shield the bombers, Elias pondered the ripple. If this worked, every pilot from here to the Pacific could stretch their wings farther, tipping the scales against the axis. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the Reich, and for the first time that day, Elias felt a spark of hope amid the hell. But far below, anti-aircraft guns tracked them, and in the distance, more fighters rose to contest the sky. The war's hunger unquenched. Elias Harper's Mustang sliced through the thinning clouds at 20 feet, the Merlin engine now humming steadily after the risky idle glide that had preserved their fuel like a miser hoarding coins. The squadron had reformed into a loose diamond, wings vigilant for the next wave of Luftwaffe intruders, while the B-17 flying fortresses lumbered ahead, their bomb bays heavy with ordnance destined for the rail yards at Magdeburg. Marcus Riley's voice buzzed in Elias's headset, a mix of exhilaration and wariness. "That glide bought us the farm, Cap. Tanks are holding at 28%. But those Jerrys aren't done. I see more bandits climbing from the deck." Elias nodded to himself, sweat beading under his oxygen mask despite the cockpit's chill, his gloved hands steady on the controls. The tactics origins replayed in his mind like a briefing film strip, back at Wright Field. Test pilots like Chuck Yeager had demonstrated it in mock combats, proving that at high altitude, a P-51 could cover 15 to 20 extra miles per gallon of avgas by trading height for distance, the plane's clean aerodynamics turning gravity into an ally. It wasn't just engineering, it was a psychological shift, forcing pilots to think like glider pilots in the deadliest arena imaginable. Elias's group, part of the 8th Air Force's push to dominate the skies post-D-Day, had been briefed on it as an emergency measure, but today marked its combat baptism under fire. The why of their mission gnawed deeper now. With Allied boots firming in Normandy, the Luftwaffe was desperate, throwing everything at the bomber streams to halt the invasion's momentum. Factories in the Ruhr churned out fighters and flak guns, U-boats prowled the Atlantic, and every escort run like this one chipped away at the Reich's defenses. Elias's own path to this moment traced back to Pearl Harbor's shock, enlisting at 19 from his Iowa roots, trading plow for propeller in a war that demanded America's industrial might to drown the Axis in steel and fire. As the formation droned eastward, the emotional web of the squadron tightened like a noose. Elias glanced at Marcus's plane, the lieutenant's silhouette unmistakable against the eastern glow, a man who'd become more brother than wingman after shared losses. The crash of their old CO over Bremen, the bailout over the Zuiderzee that left scars on everyone's nerves. Then there was Theo Grant, the kid from Oregon with a poet's soul and a sharpshooter's eye, whose Mustang now lagged a mile back, its exhaust a telltale plume of oil smoke. Radio checks had gone unanswered since the initial ambush, and Elias's gut twisted with the unspoken dread that Theo might be nursing a fatal wound or fighting controls alone. The squadron's backbone included veterans like Sergeant Hale Donovan, a burly Texan flying tail-end Charlie, his drawl a constant morale booster over the RT, and Lieutenant Sarah Klein, one of the few women ferry pilots turned combat liaison, whose intel on German radar nets had saved their hides more than once. They were a microcosm of America at war. Farmers, factory hands, dreamers funneled into this aerial crucible, bound by letters from home tucked in flight jackets and the pact of mutual survival. Elias felt the rising tension in his chest, a premonition that the glide's miracle was fragile. Fuel conservation meant less margin for error, and the Luftwaffe's aces, knights like Marseille's heirs, hunted with predatory patience. Whispers from ground crew that morning echoed. German intelligence had cracked Allied codes, anticipating deep penetrations, and flak belts around Berlin thickened daily. Marcus keyed in again, his tone shifting to the grim. "Cap, if Theo doesn't check in soon, we might have to peel off to cover him. Can't leave the pup hanging." Elias weighed it, the mission's demands clashing with loyalty. The bombers needed them whole, but abandoning a man felt like betrayal. Below, the German countryside blurred into fortified patchwork, rivers like veins feeding the war machine, and Elias sensed the storm building, the air heavy with the promise of blood. The major problem erupted without mercy as the squadron crested into the target zone, the B-17s releasing their payloads in a thunderous cascade that shook the heavens. Flak bloomed black and vicious around the bombers, shells bursting in staccato rhythm, forcing Elias to weave his Mustang through the lethal lattice while scanning for fighters. That's when the second wave hit. 30 Focke-Wulf 190s, heavier armed than the 109s, erupting from low cover over the Elbe River, their radial engines snarling as they climbed into the fray. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs, the sudden chaos turning the sky into a maelstrom of tracer fire and twisting contrails. "Break left, all birds! Engage!" he shouted into the radio, throttling up for a slashing pass that downed one FW before the enemy swarmed. Marcus stuck to his wing, their guns chattering in unison, but the odds crushed in. A 190 raked Elias's canopy with cannon fire, shattering plexiglass and filling the cockpit with acrid smoke, shards slicing his cheek like hot razors. Pain flared, blood warm on his flight suit, but he ignored it, rolling to evade as his altimeter tumbled. The suffering deepened in waves. The glide had extended their range, but now full power burned fuel ravenously, gauges dipping to 15% amid the dogfight's frenzy. Theo's voice finally crackled through, weak and ragged. "Red 4. Hit bad. Engines quitting. Can't maintain." Elias's world narrowed to horror. Theo's plane was a sitting duck, spiraling lazily as two 190s circled for the kill. The hard decision loomed, a sacrifice no man wanted. Stay with the bombers and let a brother die, or divert and risk the formation's collapse. Fear of death gripped Elias like ice. Visions of ditching in enemy territory, captured or worse, flashed unbidden. Marcus's plea cut sharp. "We gotta help him, Cap. He's family." Elias banked hard, the G-forces blurring his vision, committing to the rescue as flak nicked his wingtip, the plane shuddering. Suspense coiled tighter. Without the glide's buffer, they teetered on bingo fuel. Every maneuver a gamble against the void. In the melee, Hale Donovan's Mustang took a direct hit, erupting in a fireball that lit the afternoon like hellfire, his scream echoing briefly before static. Elias fought tears behind his mask, the war's cruelty stripping illusions bare. Bravery was just delayed terror, and today it demanded everything. Deeper into the dogfight. The climax built to a fever pitch, the Americans outnumbered but fueled by the glide's unexpected edge, their Mustangs fresher than the Luftwaffe's pursuers, who guzzled Avgas in pursuit. Elias dove on Theo's tormentors, his 50 cals ripping one 190's fuselage apart in a spray of debris, the kill buying seconds as the second enemy broke off, confused by the Americans' audacity. But chaos reigned supreme. Marcus's plane shuddered under a grazing hit, coolant streaming from a punctured radiator, forcing him to idle his engine mid-turn, a desperate echo of the tactic that had saved them earlier. "Riley, report!" Elias barked, his own fuel warning light flickering ominously at 10%. The glide's promise now a double-edged sword in the thick of it. The bombers pressed on unscathed, their mission a success amid the carnage, but Elias's squadron paid dearly. Sarah Klein's voice reported another loss, Ensign Patel spiraling out with no chute. The heavy threat peaked as a flight of four 190s converged on Theo's faltering Mustang, their leader an ace by the red nose marking, guns winking death. Elias pushed his plane to the limit, airframe groaning, closing the distance in a shallow glide to conserve what little fuel remained, the world a blur of smoke and fire. In that last-chance frenzy, an explosive twist unfolded. Theo, against all odds, nursed his bird into a shallow dive, windmilling prop carrying him toward friendly lines, but not before a lucky burst from his tailgun downed his lead attacker. Elias whooped involuntarily, the momentary triumph cutting through the despair, yet the cost mounted. Marcus's engine seized from overheating, forcing him to cut power entirely, gliding silently toward the channel as Elias covered his retreat. The squadron fragmented, the glide tactic proving its worth by allowing piecemeal escapes, but the psychological scar ran deep. Silence in combat amplified every creak, every shadow into doom. As the surviving Mustangs turned west, Elias's mind reeled from the brink, the tactic's adoption no longer theory but etched in blood, doubling range at the price of souls. The resolution settled like ash after the inferno, the remnants of Elias's squadron limping back to RAF Leaston under a blood-red sunset, fuel vapors the only whisper in their tanks. Theo Grant made it to a crash landing on a Normandy beachhead, medevaced with a shattered arm and shrapnel wounds, his survival a Pyrrhic victory that haunted Elias more than death would have, living to debrief the ghosts. Marcus ditched safely in the channel, fished out by an air-sea rescue launch, his grin flashing through salt-crusted goggles as the boat hauled him aboard. But the radiator fix would ground him for weeks, fraying the wingman bond into anxious letters. Hale Donovan's loss hit hardest, his Texan bravado silenced forever, leaving a void in the ready room where his jokes once echoed. Elias taxied to a halt, canopy sliding back to gulp fresh air laced with ditching foam. The ground crew swarming like ants. The emotional consequences crashed over him in the debrief. Pride in the mission's success, the rail yards crippled, bombers home safe, mingled with bitter realism, the war a thief stealing pieces of the soul with each sortie. The glide tactic, vindicated in fire, would spread like wildfire through the 8th Air Force. Pilots from Doolittle's Eagles to the Pacific Theater, adopting it to stretch the Mustang's legs, turning escorts into marauders that owned the sky. Yet Elias felt no hero's glow, instead, a somber reflection on the human toll, the way war altered men into hollowed versions, eyes distant as they scanned endless horizons. In the officers' club that night, ale untouched, he stared at the squadron board, chalked names fading like memories, wondering if the doubled range was worth the doubled grief. The brass would hail it as innovation, but up close, it was just another way to postpone the inevitable end. As stars pricked the English night, Elias lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like contrails, his thoughts drifting to the next run. Deeper, deadlier, the war's maw unyielding. The morning after the Magdeburg run dawned gray and sodden over RAF Leiston, the airfield a hive of activity as ground crews swarmed the Mustangs like bees tending a wounded hive. Elias Harper slumped in the debriefing tent, his bandaged cheek throbbing under the harsh glare of a single bulb, recounting the glide tactics baptism to a cluster of brass and fellow pilots. Colonel Ramsey, a stern-faced veteran with a mustache like a wire brush, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as Elias described the idle descent. The way the squadron had ghosted through the Luftwaffe's grasp, stretching their range from a desperate 400 miles to nearly 800 in effective combat loiter time. Maps sprawled across the table showed the rail yards in ruins, B-17 losses minimal thanks to the escort's endurance, and whispers rippled through the room. This wasn't just survival, it was revolution. Marcus Riley, fresh from the infirmary with his arm in a sling, chimed in from the corner, his Brooklyn accent cutting the tension like a knife. "It doubled our legs, sir. Fought longer, hit harder, and still made it home. Theo's alive because of it." The kid from Oregon, pale and propped on crutches, nodded weakly from a cot, his shattered arm a testament to the tactic's razor edge. Elias felt the weight of their stares, the emotional undercurrent of loss, Hale Donovan's empty chair a silent accusation, but also the spark of validation. Engineers from right field had wired in, confirming the data. At 30, 0 feet, minimal power let the Merlin's slipstream efficiency and the Mustang's low drag convert altitude into pure distance, fuel burn dropping to a trickle while maintaining forward momentum. The 8th Air Force would mandate it. Training films rushed into production, and Elias's squadron dubbed Ghost Riders for their silent sweeps. Yet as the meeting broke, Elias caught Ramsey's sidelong glance, a hint of the cost unspoken. More missions, deeper penetrations, the war's appetite insatiable. Outside, rain pattered on the tarmac, washing away oil stains like tears, and Elias wondered if the doubled range meant doubled exposure to the Reaper. Word of the glide spread like contrails across the European theater. Pilots from the 4th Fighter Group to the 9th Air Force, scribbling notes in their logbooks, the tactic filtering down through informal channels, ale-fueled tales in pubs, scribbled diagrams on napkins. Elias spent the next days in a haze of recovery, his cheek stitched and infected, fever dreams replaying the dogfight's roar fading to eerie hush. Marcus visited daily, smuggling cigarettes and recounting scuttlebutt. Chuck Yeager himself had radioed congratulations from another base, the test pilot's drawl praising the combat proof of his wind tunnel brainchild. Theo Grant, transferred to a field hospital, sent a scrawled letter via courier, his poet's words laced with grit. "We flew like eagles on the wind cap. Tell the brass to bottle it." But the emotional connections frayed under war's grind. Sarah Klein, the liaison with her sharp intel, confided over tea that losses like hails were mounting, the squadron's morale a fragile thread. Elias forged deeper bonds in the quiet hours, mentoring a green replacement named Lieutenant Finn Caldwell, a wiry Minnesotan with wide eyes and a fear of heights he hid behind bravado. They walked the flight line at dusk, Elias explaining the glide's nuances, the shallow descent angle to avoid stalls, the burst of power needed for evasion, how it turned the Mustang from sprinter to marathoner. Finn absorbed it like scripture, his questions probing the why. America's late entry demanded innovation. The P-51's range the key to strangling the Luftwaffe's resurgence post-Normandy. Elias shared his own ghosts, the Iowa farm boy's innocence shattered by Pearl Harbor, enlisting to avenge the sneak attack that dragged a sleeping giant into the fray. The rising tension built subtly, briefings hinting at a big push. Operation Cobra, the breakout from the beachhead, requiring escorts to roam free over France, hunting trains and troops. Fuel rationing tightened. Drop tanks modified for quicker jettison, and Elias felt the premonition coil in his gut. The tactic would shine, but the skies grew hungrier, German jets rumored on the horizon. As thunder rumbled distant, mirroring the flak's echo, Elias gripped Finn's shoulder, the pact unspoken. "Watch my six, kid, and I'll show you how to cheat the odds." The next mission launched under a clearing sky on July 25, 1944, the squadron climbing out from Leiston in a V of silver arrows, bound for a sweep over the Falaise Gap where Allied armor clashed with Panzers in a cauldron of dust and diesel. Elias led from the point, his Mustang's cockpit familiar as an old glove, oxygen mask fogging slightly as they punched to 30. Woo-0 feet over the channel's chop. Marcus, cleared for limited duty in a spare bird, flew wing again, his voice steady over the RT. "Ready to ghost 'em, Cap? Tanks full, hearts heavier." The formation included Finn on the flank, Theo's slot filled by a veteran transfer named Captain Lyle Voss, a laconic Californian with 20 kills notched on his prop. The Y burned fresh. With Patton's tank surging, the Luftwaffe scrambled to blunt the advance, their fighters and Stukas dive-bombing columns while V-1 buzz bombs harried London. Elias's group, now exemplars of the glide doctrine, was tasked with clearing the corridor, loitering twice as long to pounce on any aerial threat. Sensory assault hit early, the thin air's bite, the Merlin's thrum vibrating bones, the faint metallic tang of fear sweat. They firewalled throttles for the climb, then eased back, practicing the idle at cruise to demonstrate for Finn. Altitude held, ground speed steady, the tactic a seamless weave into routine. But as France's hedgerows unfolded below, scarred by shellfire, dots materialized on the eastern horizon, a gaggle of FW-190s, 20 strong, vectored by ground control to intercept the intruders. Elias keyed the radio, calm masking the adrenaline spike. "Red leader to all, bandits at 2 o'clock, low and fast, glide on my mark, conserve for the merge." The squadron acknowledged, engines spooling down in unison, the sudden silence amplifying heartbeats as they slipped forward like specters. Marcus's chuckle crackled. "Here we go again. Eagles on the wind." Elias scanned the patchwork earth, bomb craters like poxmarks, a reminder of the ground war's toll, and braced for the collision, the doubled range their only edge in the gathering storm. The ambush struck with ferocity as the 190s climbed into view, their pilots spotting the silent Mustangs too late, overshooting in confusion before wheeling for a head-on assault. Elias snapped his stick, bursting power for a quick deflection shot that holed a lead enemy's canopy, the FW tumbling in a corkscrew plume. But the enemy adapted swiftly, pairs breaking high and low to bracket the formation, cannon fire stitching the sky like deadly lace. Finn's voice broke over the RT, edged with panic. "Red 5, taking hits, losing pressure." Elias banked to cover him, his own guns barking, but a shell grazed his wing, alarms wailing as hydraulic fluid sprayed. The suffering intensified in the melee, the glide silence now a curse, maneuvers sluggish without instant thrust, forcing shallow turns that bled altitude precious feet at a time. Marcus dove to aid Finn, their planes entwining in a furball, but a 190 clipped Marcus's stabilizer, sending him into a flat spin that demanded full power to recover, fuel guzzling away the hard-won margin. Elias's world blurred with pain and focus, blood from an earlier nick reopening, the cockpit a sauna of sweat and smoke. Deeper horror unfolded. Voss's Mustang erupted under concentrated fire, a mid-air pyre that scattered debris like confetti, his last transmission a curse swallowed by static. The hard decision crystallized: press the sweep and abandon the wounded, or escort Finn back and leave the gap exposed to Stuka raids. Fear of death clawed raw, visions of capture in the bocage, Gestapo cells, or a shallow grave amid the ruins. Elias chose loyalty, peeling off with Marcus and Finn in tow, the trio gliding westward at idle to nurse their birds home, gauges dipping to 8% amid evasive jinx. Suspense ratcheted to the breaking point. Below, German flak wagons tracked them, bursts blooming close enough to rock the airframe, while pursuing 190s nipped at their tails. Finn's engine coughed, trailing blue smoke, his pleas urgent. "Can't hold it, Cap. Glide's all I've got left." Elias covered the retreat, downing one pursuer in a desperate overshoot, but the war's cruelty peaked, the mission half done, allies exposed, the tactics promise tainted by retreat. As the channel neared, Elias's resolve hardened, the doubled range a tool forged in fire, yet the emotional scar widened, brotherhood tested to its frayed limits. In the climax's savage throes, the pursuing 190s closed relentlessly, their pilots sensing blood in the water, forcing Elias to throttle up sporadically for bursts that slashed fuel like a knife. The heavy threat crested as lead elements dove in a thatch weave, crisscrossing to confuse the gliding Mustangs, tracers converging on Finn's faltering plane. Elias rolled inverted, the G's squeezing his vision to tunnels, and loosed a deflection burst that winged the aggressor, sending it limping away. But chaos reigned. Marcus, low on coolant, idled again, his Mustang a silent glider that evaded 2 passes by sheer momentum, the tactic's genius shining in extremis. "Stay with me, boys. Channel in sight," Elias urged, his voice raw, the altimeter unwinding to 15,000 feet as they traded height for speed. The last chance frenzy peaked with an explosive twist, a lone P-47 Thunderbolt from a coastal patrol, drawn by the radio chatter, barreled into the fray, its 8 guns pulverizing a 190 and scattering the rest. The unexpected ally bought the escape, Finn's bird splashing down short of the rescuers, his bailout a white bloom against the waves, while Elias and Marcus circled protectively until the launch arrived. The squadron's gamble paid off, the glide allowing survival where full power would have stranded them, but the psychological toll etched deeper, silence amplifying isolation, every shadow a phantom kill. As they turned for base, Elias glimpsed the horizon's promise of more sweeps, the tactic now legend, doubling not just range, but the war's reach into men's souls. Yet in the adrenaline's ebb, a radio squawk from command hinted at the hook. Urgent recall for a night op, whispers of jet sightings, Elias's hand trembling on the yoke as the sun dipped, the maw widening for the morrow's feast. Elias Harper nursed his Mustang back to RAF Leaston under the fading light of that July evening, the channel's salt spray still stinging his eyes as the airfield's runway lights flickered to life like hesitant stars. The glide tactic had once again proven its mettle, allowing him and Marcus Riley to escort the battered Finn Caldwell to safety, their fuel gauges hovering just above empty as wheels kissed tarmac. Ground crewmen rushed forward, chocks thudding under tires, while Elias popped his canopy, gulping the damp English air thick with the scent of high octane and wet grass. Marcus taxied up beside him, the lieutenant's face ashen but etched with that irrepressible grin, his plane's cowling scarred from the day's close calls. Finn, hauled aboard the rescue launch, was already en route to the base hospital, his bailout a small miracle amid the losses, Voss gone in flames, the Falaise sweep aborted, leaving Allied columns vulnerable to the Luftwaffe's opportunistic strikes. Elias climbed down, legs unsteady from the G's and the emotional grind, clapping Marcus on the shoulder as medics swarmed. The resolution of the mission settled heavily, a mix of tactical triumph and hollow ache. The tactic's adoption was accelerating, briefings now mandating idle glides for all long-range escorts, turning the 8th Air Force's Mustangs into spectral hunters that could loiter over the continent twice as long, crippling German supply lines from Berlin to the Rhine. Yet the human cost gnawed deeper. Hale Donovan's memory lingered in the empty hangar slot, Theo Grant's recovery a distant telegram of pain, and now Finn's uncertain fate added to the ledger. Elias felt the war's bitter realism seep in during the debrief, Colonel Ramsey praising the doubled range as a game-changer, crediting Wright Field's engineers for quantifying how the P-51's laminar flow wing and efficient Merlin engine converted 30,000 feet of altitude into 40 miles of unpowered flight, fuel savings that let pilots fight rather than flee. But Elias's somber reflection cut through the jargon. Innovation bought time, not lives, and each silent descent amplified the isolation, the sky's vastness a mirror to the soul's erosion. In the officers' mess, ale flowed sparingly, toasts to the absent raised in murmurs. Elias staring into his glass, the doubled range a double burden, farther from home, closer to the reaper's shadow. Word of the Falaise furball rippled through the air bases like a shockwave, pilots from Debden to Boxted adapting the glide into doctrine, scribbling altitude-to-distance ratios on cockpit clipboards, the tactic evolving from desperation to standard procedure. Elias spent the following week in a limbo of paperwork and light duties, his cheek wound healing into a puckered scar that tugged when he smiled, a constant reminder of the cockpit shrapnel's kiss. Marcus, grounded briefly for checks on his overheating Merlin, bunked nearby, their evenings filled with replayed sorties over lukewarm tea, dissecting how the idol had turned pursuers into prey. The 190's pilots baffled by the vanishing roar, buying precious seconds to reposition. Theo Grant arrived by ambulance midweek, gaunt but walking, his arm in a cast signed with squadron nicknames, recounting his beach crash with a wry poet's twist. The Normandy sands softer than expected. French resistance smuggling him to medics under cover of night. Bonds reformed in the infirmary visits. Laughter brittle but real, as Sarah Klein shared fresh intel, Luftwaffe fuel shortages mirroring their own, the glide's efficiency a counter to Göring's dwindling reserves. Elias mentored Finn during his convalescence, the Minnesotan's wide eyes narrowing with resolve as he learned the nuances. Initiate at 28, ISO 0 feet for optimal glide ratio, monitor airspeed to avoid the stall buffet, burst throttle only for kills or evasion. The math simple yet unforgiving. 2 gallons saved equaled 20 minutes of combat loiter. The emotional undercurrent swirled thicker now, the squadron a family scarred but resilient. Letters from Iowa farms and Brooklyn tenements piling up, anchors against the drift. Yet rising tension brewed in the briefings, maps unrolling to reveal the next phase. Market Garden, Montgomery's bold Rhine jump, demanding escorts push 600 miles round trip. The glide essential to cover paratroop drops without bingo fuel. Elias felt the premonition tighten, German Me-262 jets whispering in reconnaissance reports, their jet streams outpacing props, the tactic silence no shield against Mach speeds. As rain lashed the Quonsets, Elias polished his escape kit, the doubled range a promise of deeper peril, the war's maw evolving faster than men's ingenuity. The night operation launched under a moonless shroud on September 17, 1944. The squadron's Mustangs catapulating into the velvet dark. Navigation lights dimmed to ghosts as they formed up over the wash. Elias gripped the yoke, the cockpit's green glow casting eerie shadows on his instruments. The Merlin's idle thrum a subdued heartbeat at 30, ISO feet. Marcus flew wing, his voice a steady anchor over the RT. Clear skies up here, Cap. Glide initiated. Arnhem in 20. The formation included a mix of veterans and replacements. Finn cleared for limited flights in a rear slot. His cast traded for a brace, while new blood like Lieutenant Ray Harlan, a sharpshooting Nebraskan, filled Voss's void. The mission's why pulsed urgently. Support the airborne assault. Sweep the corridors clear of fighters so gliders could unload troops unmolested. The Allied pushed to end the war before winter's bite. Sensory details assaulted in the black. The chill seeping through flight suits, the faint ozone whiff of high voltage, the distant rumble of flak from unseen batteries. They cruised in silent glides, altitude traded for stealthy progress. The tactic perfected now with radio silence protocols, conserving not just fuel, but emissions to evade radar. Below, the Low Countries unfolded in patches of moonlight, dikes like silver threads, the Rhine a dark serpent guarding the Reich. Tension coiled as dots appeared on the horizon, Luftwaffe night fighters. Ju-88s with radar noses probing the gloom, vectored to shred the invasion's flanks. Elias broke the hush. Bandits at 11 o'clock, power up selective, engage on sight. The ambush materialized in bursts of tracer fire, the 88s diving from clouds, their Schrägemusik upward-firing cannons raking undersides like invisible scythes. Elias evaded, bursting throttle for a climb that downed one intruder in a silent plume, but the suffering hit hard. Harlan's Mustang took a direct burst, spiraling into the night without a mayday, the void swallowing his light. Marcus's plane shuddered under grazing fire, instruments flickering, forcing another idle descent to cool overheating systems. The glide's double edge turning evasion into vulnerability. Deeper into the nocturnal fray, the major problem escalated as more 88s swarmed, their pilots exploiting the darkness to pick off stragglers, the sky a lethal chessboard of echoes and shadows. Elias's heart thundered, the oxygen mask fogging with each ragged breath, pain from his scar flaring as G-forces twisted his frame. Finn's voice cracked urgent. Red 6, engine hit, losing oil pressure, gliding blind here. The hard decision loomed amid the chaos. Press to Arnhem and abandon the Kid, or divert and risk the entire corridor's exposure to unescorted bombers. Fear of death clawed primal, the black void below promising no parachutes in enemy hands. Gestapo interrogations, or worse in the fog-shrouded woods. Elias committed, banking into a shallow glide to cover Finn, his guns probing the dark for phantoms, fuel at 12% after sporadic bursts. Suspense peaked as an 88 bored and unseen, cannon shells shredding Finn's tail. The young pilot's scream cut short by static, his Mustang erupting in a brief fireball that lit the clouds orange. Marcus whooped a counter-kill, his burst claiming the attacker. But the loss hollowed them, brotherhood fracturing under war's impartial blade. Elias pushed on alone with Marcus, the glide stretching their range to loiter over the drop zones, witnessing gliders spiral in flames from ground fire, the tactic allowing witness to the airborne's peril without stranding them. The suffering layered thick. Isolation in the silent descent amplified every creak of airframe, every distant explosion a personal dirge, the doubled range meaning prolonged exposure to the night's horrors. As dawn's gray hinted on the horizon, Elias nursed his bird westward, gauges whispering empty, the mission a partial success. Corridors partially cleared, but at the cost of dreams deferred. The Rhine unbridged, winter's stalemate looming. The climax shattered the pre-dawn hush as a final wave of 88s converged, radar-guided wolves sensing the Americans' fuel-starved state, forcing Elias into a last-stand weave over the Zyder Z. The heavy threat crested with lead elements closing in a pincer, tracers arcing like comets. Elias's Mustang dancing on the edge of stall as he idled to evade, bursting power only for a desperate shot that felled one foe in a splash below. Marcus mirrored him, their glide synchronized like a deadly waltz, the tactic's efficiency turning desperation into defiance, covering twice the distance while the enemy burned Avgus in futile pursuits. Chaos peaked in the frenzy. An explosive twist erupted when Allied searchlights from coastal batteries pierced the gloom, blinding the 88s and allowing a squadron of Mosquito night fighters to pounce, their cannons turning the sky into a slaughter pen, the unexpected convergence scattering the Luftwaffe remnants. Elias capitalized, downing another in the confusion. But Marcus's engine coughed fatally, coolant gone, forcing a full idle glide toward the lights, Elias covering until rescue flares bloomed. The last chance survival hinged on the tactic's core, altitude as currency, spent wisely to reach safety, the doubled range etching their escape where full power would have doomed them to ditching. As the sun crested, painting the waves gold, the squadron's survivors touched down at Leiston, Elias's wheels smoking from overheated brakes, the emotional torrent crashing, pride in the glides that saved the operation's flank mingled with grief for Finn and Harlan, the war's realism a bitter draft. In the Resolution's quiet, briefings hailed the night as vindication, the tactic now Air Force gospel, spreading to the 9th and 15th groups. Pilots cutting engines at altitude to haunt the Reich's nights, doubling escorts that broke the Luftwaffe's back. Yet Elias's reflection soured it. Men like Finn, altered forever or lost, their sacrifices the true price, souls gliding toward an uncertain peace. As he lit a cigarette in the dawn chill, a runner approached with urgent orders, jet intercepts over the Ruhr, Me-262s rising, Elias's hand steadying on the dispatch, the hook pulling tighter, the skies evolving, the glide their final gamble against tomorrow's thunder.